Coming up next on C-SPAN, we conclude our series of American Profile interviews from Chicago as we spend the next 60 minutes with Barbara Proctor. She is President and Chief Executive Officer of Proctor & Gardner Advertising.
Barbara Proctor, you are not a Chicago native. How long have you lived here?
I've lived here since the late 50s. I came in about 1956.
What brought you here?
I lost my money to go back to North Carolina. As a matter of fact, I didn't lose it. I went shopping and I spent it. And I lost my bus fare to go back to North Carolina. And in a sense, I've been 30 years trying to get my bus fare back home, back to North Carolina, and teaching, which is what I trained to do.
What had brought you here in the first place?
I had come to Kalamazoo, Michigan, to work as a camp counselor. And that's about 90 miles away, I guess. And on my way back home, I had come to Chicago, which is the next largest big city, to buy my teaching clothes for the fall, and of course spent the money. And I could not go home. Go to teach. The city was a wonderful place. And the only reason I was a teacher in the first place is we're talking now the 50s, and in North Carolina, and I went to school in Alabama, and the only things you could train for if you were a black girl in the South, rural, poor, was a teacher, a hairdresser, and a nurse. So of those three, I chose to be a teacher. Well, I wasn't a very good teacher. I was an English teacher, but I couldn't spell. So that's a very, that's kind of like a job handicap. Except it was very motivating for my students, because when I would put the test on the board, they would always correct the spelling in the questions. So in a way, it was kind of very motivational to be a teacher, but I realized that I probably should have some other vocation.
A couple of questions when you tell the story pop into my mind. First of all, the cities that you were in, or the towns that you were in right before you came, were all Midwestern.
Yes.
For a Midwesterner, what is Chicago?
Well, now what Chicago is really the national laboratory. We're right in the middle of everything, and we are the mid-coast, if you would look at it that way, because when people we're not as laid back as the West Coast, we're not as frenetic as the East Coast. But we're just about right, and we watch people as they migrate across the country, going from place to place, and they all come through Chicago. So in terms of making it in the world, in terms of trying to find out what games are being played currently, if you can make it in Chicago, you can make it anywhere in the world. That is not true of any of the other coasts.
Now, is that the way that Midwesterners see the city? Or is it the way Chicagoans see the city? Or that people on both coasts see the city?
Well, certainly it's not the way the people on both coasts see the city. It is the way a Chicagoan sees the city. I don't think the Midwesterners, I think the Midwesterners probably consider Chicago as someplace somewhere else, not really their part of the state at all. But we think in Chicago that we have a pretty good handle on all of it.
How do you think the people who live in the East or West Coast see the city?
Well, the people who live on the East Coast see us as not quite there. We're sort of their retarded cousins, and we're not quite as sharp. We do not do the cultural scene quite the way they do it in New York, they feel. And the people on the West Coast believe that we really, really are out to lunch. We just don't seem to have it at all, because we have none of the valley scene. We have, we work. We're the plotters of the world, I would imagine. But there's something very interesting about it, is they all like to come here. And they like to try their art, their craft, their profession here. They like to hone it here. They like to try it out here. And so deep down, I think that we're everybody's hometown, that in a way they want to get away from, but they love it just the same.
And yet Chicago is the third largest city in the United States?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Just sheer numbers would seem like it would command more respect.
Well, numbers do not always command respect. I think we are a very respected city. I think we have a world reputation. that is to be envied in many cases. When people talk about what is really the important thing about Chicago, we have seaports, we have ports, waterways and ports, we have transportation, we have amusement, we have culture, we have just tremendous amounts of things that make this really a world-class city. We have that overriding reputation which we got from Mr. Capone, which seems to be pervasive, and I think it's part of the intrigue that is Chicago. But that's only a part of our history. That is in no way our future.
Of course, as we talk, and we've got about an hour to spend with you, Chicago's going to be our theme all the way through.
Oh,
we'll get back
great.
to it. But I want to go back to the Barbara Proctor story.
Oh.
We're in late 50s, and you're leaving the teaching career.
Right.
And how do you start in a big city like this?
Well, I really have always been able to place myself at what I call the whim of the universe. Didn't have that many great plans as to what I was going to do. I sort of kind of leave all of my options open, and events tend to lead me in one way or the other. I did not have a place to go, and the person who was a beauty shop owner had a little room that she let me stay in a few days. I just rode the bus, and I went to Chicago Urban League at the time, and thought, well, since I don't have my money, and until someone sends me some money to go home, why don't I come and work at the Urban League till the money arrives from someplace? And I did, and I thought I was volunteering, and after 2 weeks I got a check. And I realized that I had a job, and I thought, well, you know, why leave? I've got a job now, so I stayed here. And I worked for the first year or so in social work at the Chicago Urban League at that time under the leadership of a man who was since retired, Sidney Williams. But that was my introduction to the city.
What made you confident that things would work out?
Well, I have never had what is either, I don't know whether to call it the luxury or the hindrance of having anyone to take care of me, you see. One of the issues when you are, at the time, which was a big thing, an illegitimate child, and had been hidden away for most of your life until my grandmother found me and brought me home, I had never had a father, nor a mother, or anyone to take primary care of me. I went to school on a scholarship, so I was accustomed to taking care of myself. And I had I was an honor student. I had gotten 2 degrees in 4 years, and I thought I should be able to at least take care of me. My needs were very small.
When you describe an upbringing, a background like that, one could look at it and say those are a lot of odds to beat. Where did you learn the scrappiness, the values that allowed you to overcome those?
Well, I didn't know they were odds. That was life, you see. I grew up in a community where we were all poor, white and black alike. You know, there were no rich people.
Where was that?
That was in Black Mountain, North Carolina. And well, as a matter of fact, we lived very close to Billy Graham. He wasn't rich at the time. He was just starting his ministry, and in Montreat, North Carolina. But we were all kind of the same ilk, and there was no lights, there was no running water. I lived in what was called a shotgun shanty with my grandmother, and that's a house made out of clapboard and boards setting up on pillows of brick and stone, and it looked as though someone had taken a shotgun and blown a hole through the whole thing. And so those were the doors from the front to the back, all lined up, and there were 4 rooms, and we all lived that way. We went down the path to the outhouse and down the road to the well for water. And how do you know that there's anything else if everybody lives like that? So we did not know until I went away to high school into Asheville, North Carolina, that there was even another way to live.
And did you go to college?
I went to college at Talladega, Alabama, which is a southern school. Talladega was founded in 1850 by basically the slave owners. It was a school that they sent the children of the slaves and the black slaves and the white slave owners' children all went to Talladega and places like that. It was always an interracial school because the people were gorgeous there. The year I went to school was the first year that women didn't have to send in their photograph with their application because it was known as the Garden Spot of the South. And the most beautiful black women in the country were going to Talladega. And fortunately, the year I applied, we did not have to send in photographs.
You studied education?
I studied, the first 3 years I was there on scholarship. And I completed my 4-year course in 3 years, and I got a degree in English and education. And that was to be a teacher. The next year, I decided to stay, and I got another degree in psychology and sociology.
You mentioned your grandmother. Was it she who was the major influence on your life up until you finished college?
Oh, absolutely. I think if there is any degree of self-esteem or somebodyness in me, it is because my grandmother was very clear on helping me to sort out the values that had to be pervasive in my life. We used to clean houses. That was a major industry in Black Mountain. We'd clean the cabins, when the summer people came up from Georgia and Florida for their summer homes in the mountain, and my grandmother would get paid $2 an hour a day to clean the house, and if I went with her, I got paid a quarter. And the little white ladies would run around and they'd pat me on the head and they'd say, "Oh, she's real cute." And my grandmother would say, "No, she ain't cute, but she's right smart. And she's gonna mount to something one day." And she always told me, don't worry about cute. Even if you were cute, that won't last. She said to put it into your head and nobody can ever take it from you. So that was an overriding important experience. It was a tremendous experience for me to go to that school where all around me, there were gorgeous women because that was just a tradition. And I wasn't, quite frankly, I was probably the ugliest person there in terms of girls, but I knew I was right smart. And I knew I was the smartest girl there when I was there. And so that helped. It gave me the dignity to walk around the campus with the beautiful girls, and it really worked well because a lot of the guys weren't as smart as they should have been, and they loved to stay with me to help them do their homework and term papers and whatever. So it was a great time.
Did your grandmother live to see you a success?
Well, my grandmother always thought I was a success. She did live to see me come to Chicago and become an international director for a record company, which was a job move from working for the Urban League. And she was very proud of that. But she was the kind of woman who had no education herself, and she worked in the winter as a maid, and she worked in the summer. She worked in the summer as a maid, and she worked in the winter as a cook at a college in Montreat, North Carolina. And she had left her husband with 7 little children, and had educated them all. And she always said, not one of my children ever went to jail, and they all finished school. So her values of what a success was that kind of thing. So the fact that I had grown up and gone through the odds, as it were, and I was in Chicago doing good, I was a success to her.
Now, a job move from the Urban League to a record company doesn't seem like
it's not an easy segue, right? Well, in working at the Urban League, I had this radio that was not too good. It didn't have a dial on it, so I never knew what station I was listening to. And at night, I was working, of course. I always had the work ethic, and I'd work very late at night. And late at night, after midnight, I'd hear this voice. And I just fell in love with the voice. And I didn't know who it was, and I just had no way of knowing. Finally, someone came and looked, and they told me the voice was Sid McCoy, and who was the disc jockey at the time. And it was just somebody I had to meet because it was the most wonderful voice I'd ever heard. And he owned a record store in Chicago. And I, back to my mother's ethic of if you work hard enough, you can work your way into anywhere. I went into his record company, and it was just chaos. There were records everywhere. And I introduced myself and volunteered to inventory the records and set up a filing system for his records for free. And they thought I was a complete idiot, but I did it. It took me almost 2 months to do it. And he came in, because I was doing it after school and after work, and he came in and wanted to know who this strange person was. And he found that, he asked me, had I ever done any writing at all? And I told him I had been writing in college. And he said, would you be interested in writing liner notes on albums? Because he was working for Vee-Jay Records at the time. I got started into that as a writer. And then he brought me into that company as a PR director. And as a result of that, I got an opportunity to go to Europe 4 times a year for the record label and trade talent. And in so doing, in December of '62, I brought the Beatles to America.
Well, tell us about that.
So, well, we were, at the time, the Vee-Jay Record Company had the four seasons, Frankie Valli in the 4 seasons, and Big Girls Don't Cry, and we had the Duke of Earl, and Dee Clark, and Jerry Butler and the Impressions, and Curtis Mayfield, and all those people. And so we were hot. Our records were great. So we would take these records and make distribution deals in Europe. And I took the 4 seasons and Frankie Valli to London and made a trade with EMI Records in London to trade the 4 seasons records for the Beatles, who at the time were unknown. And and it's a wonderful coup, except I have to say that I didn't think too much of it at the time because I only signed them to 30 sides and said, well, you know, we don't want to take any chances on this unknown. And so we had the first 30 sides of the Beatles records in America on the Vee-Jay label. Mm-hmm. So that was that.
Let's stay on that for just a minute because, mm-hmm. Of course, right now people are thinking a lot about the Beatles. It's anniversary time, that sort of thing. What are your thoughts? Is it the business side of that job that attracted you, or is it the music?
It was the music. And it was always the music, because one of the other things that I had started doing as being a writer for liner notes for Vee-Jay Records, mm-hmm. That introduced me into the whole world of musicians, jazz musicians. And because I knew jazz musicians and R&B musicians so well, I got an invitation to write for Downbeat. So I was a Downbeat critic for 10 years. So it was an opportunity to write and to be involved with music. And so that was what was most appealing to me. It mm-hmm. gave me an opportunity for a black writer, because at the time there just weren't any black writers. There were no black persons involved in that creative process of selling and marketing the black talent. So this gave me an opportunity to do that, and I loved it. Mm-hmm.
Your thoughts then, since it is the music side, on what music contributes to society?
Oh, I think music is, I think if you will look at culture, the cultural arts, what people do when they don't have to do something tells you an awful lot about what they are. When you work, you have to do that work. When you study, you have to study. But when you go out to dance, when you sing, what you dance, that's what you volunteered to do. So music is extremely important. It is probably the best reflection of the spirit of a people that there is. It is the people at their happiest, their saddest. It expresses freely their hopes, their frustrations, their disappointments. It's all in their music.
Since you were directly involved with bringing the Beatles to this country, what do you think was the net result? Did it change our society, change our young people at all?
Oh, I think the Beatles, I think they did. I think they will never get the credit that they deserve, and rightly or wrongly, depending on how people feel about the world. Because the Beatles, the Beatles, I would say, and someone like Elvis, those were the people who began the breaking down of the barriers between people and made it all right for people to have a dialogue between each other and come together and laugh and come together and talk and share an appreciation for each other. And I think the Beatles did that. I think the fact that they were not American white artists made a difference too, because they weren't bringing along American baggage when they came. They came, they expressed a tremendous respect for the black music. They were not ashamed of it. They did not feel threatened by it. They simply expressed it. And that made it okay for a whole generation of other people to do that. Mm-hmm. And once you have people recreating together, enjoying together, sharing common experiences together, they cannot ever again hate in that same way that they can when they are ignorant of each other. And knowledge reduces the level of hatred tremendously.
Chicago is a music city.
Yes, it is.
Has the music of Chicago had the kind of impact you just described?
Well, the music of Chicago has had it when it was in its heyday. So much of the music of Chicago was created during the 50s and the 60s, when you had the clubs like the Mr. Kellers and the Chez Paris and the Club de Lisa's and the old Grand Ballroom and the Southmore Hotel and all of those places. But the places aren't there anymore. The old Village Gate and all of these places when all forms of music had a chance to be expressed. That was a wonderful time because there was a cross-fertilization of concepts and ideas between Hyde Park and Old Town and South Side and the Loop and all of these places, and it's just not there anymore. It would be good if it were, but it is not. But it's had a very good effect when it could on the city.
Your career with Vee-Jay Records, how long, when you signed the Beatles to come here, how long was it before you realized that you had made a pretty momentous decision, and how old were you?
Well, let's see, that was 62, and so that was 20, how many years ago was that?
62, we're in 89 now, so we're
whatever it is, I was 26 at the time. So it was, we released that record. I think the first two sides that I brought back were I Want to Hold Your Hand and Please Please Me, as I remember. I think those were the first two. And we released those in January because I came back in December. And we knew by February that we had a hit. They were on Jack Parr's show, which was before the Ed Sullivan Show, which is what everyone remembers. Everybody remembers that they were on the Ed Sullivan Show that September or sometime, but actually they were on the Jack Parr Show first. And so we knew we had a hit, and we also knew that we had made a mistake. We should have signed a longer contract.
What did that do for the career of a 26-year-old in the music business? Well,
it almost did nothing for me because my life is just what is called one stage of phoenix scene, rising out of the ashes all the time. Because just as as that was coming up, the record company itself was coming down because the record company was privately owned, and the owners and the general manager of the station were having conflict, and he left, and I left with him, and my marriage fell apart at the same time, and it was the beginning of what I called at that time my twilight zone. So I stayed in-house for about 18 months and licked my wounds, and it had nothing to do for me at all.
What was the next step for you?
Well, I had to recenter. You know, there are times when you have to recenter, and you say, "This is," because see, I suspect women are a lot, but I am especially. I'm a very bonding person. And I will overstay anything. You know, if you make it warm and fuzzy enough, I'll stay there and die, you know, never move. But life has a way, and the universe has a way of saying, if I have to tear this all down around you to get you out of here, you've got somewhere else to go. So my friends, fortunately, and these were not big, powerful people. These were secretaries and teachers and housewives who used their grocery money. They took care of me for 18 months, and I had a brand new baby, and they said, just get yourself together. And when you feel like it, you know, things will happen and it'll be right. And while I was thinking about what I had to do, I said, I want to be in advertising. And why advertising? First of all, I could still write freelance. And I could write anything in the world in 3,500 words. I could just write anything, perfect 3,500 words. But I knew, and I was selling, but I knew that I needed to be better and shorter. I was very verbose and used far too many words and too many adjectives and everything. So I said I need to learn to write short. So I looked around in that year and tried to find out what is the best form of short writing. Well, of course, advertising is. Advertising is the most precise writing in the world, because in the space of 50 to 80 words, you have to move millions of dollars worth of product. And you have to persuade millions of people not only to listen to you, but to go into their pocket and buy something which they may or may not need, based on your well-chosen 50 to 80 words. So I thought, that's something I need to learn to do. So if I can learn to write like that, then I will be the best writer in the world. And I set out to start my career in advertising.
How did you teach yourself to write in that style?
Well, getting into advertising wasn't as easy as saying I want to come into advertising, because this now we are in 1962. And as late as 1960, well, to 63, as late as 1963, there were still no black professionals in the city of Chicago in advertising. So there was no place for me. You know, I had come off of being an international director. I was making $30,000 a year in that time for a woman. I had a Lincoln Continental and a Thunderbird supplied by the company, and I had an 8-room condo, a co-op at the time. So I was, for the first time in my life, of having been always told that I was not adequate, I was overqualified. And so nobody wanted to hire me because I was overqualified. And finally I found a company that wanted to take a chance on me, not for any good motives at all, but very bad motives, but it didn't matter, I was get the job. So I went into advertising, and the first job I had was writing the back labels to Pine Sol bottles. So that was my first writing experience in advertising. And I was always really happy that for 20 years they didn't change that copy. I thought, that's pretty good copy. Mm-hmm. And so that was my first one. I just had to keep writing it over and over. And when you're given an assignment and you've got 2.5 inches by 4 to fill, and you've got to talk about the ingredients, and you've got to talk about the benefits, and you've got to sell the product, and you've got to do it, you'd better learn to do it short. So advertising just makes you do that.
I don't think we've had the opportunity to have anyone in the advertising business on camera before here on C-SPAN, so I'd like to pick your brain a little bit about advertising.
Sure.
Do you think in grand terms, philosophical terms, about advertising in society?
Surely, always.
Give us your thoughts on it.
Well, I must tell you that I do not lead a great majority feeling inside the industry, but I have a feeling that advertising leads social change. My colleagues tend to believe that our advertising follows social change. I justify my decision based on the fact that we are and we act in accordance with that we see ourselves projected. And as you appear in media, that's who you think you are. That's the only guide that you have of knowing who you are. And if you consider the fact that all media is supported by advertising, and that advertising only will support that media which is in its own economic best interests, then you have to conclude that advertising leads social change, because people change when the advertisers say they must. There has been, all of the hue and cry even now about having to clean up the airways. Well, what is now happening is the advertisers are saying it has to be cleaned up. It will be cleaned up. It will not be cleaned up until the advertisers say it will.
If you hold that view that advertising has such import, there's an awful lot of weight that goes behind decisions, a lot of ethics perhaps required of people who would work in that industry.
Well, at least opinions. You know, everybody has their own version of whether it's ethics or not, because I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning to go out and be unethical. I think there are differences of opinions, and I think it is easy. I think if someone really genuinely believes that they do not impact people, they probably don't do a good job of it anyway. But if you do know that you do have that ability to do it, then you can't. There are certain things you just simply cannot do because you know what effect you are having on people.
Holding that belief, and now that you head up your own advertising agency, do you have strong guidelines for what kind of products you'll take on?
Well, yes, but they're flexible and they change. Some of them were long held forever. For example, when we first opened our agency, we did not take alcohol of any kind, and for 18 years. And we took our first alcoholic beverage account 3 years ago with the G. Holloman Brewing Company. We took that account with the client knowing full well how strongly I felt about the responsible drinking and the issues with alcohol, but also with that client's firm commitment that they were not just in the market to sell beer, that they were willing to make a partnership and that we could develop a total program, not just advertising. And so we have done that. We are working with developing all kinds of community-based programs, because I think one of the other things that has changed between then and now is people are a little less focused in the 80s than they were in the 60s, when they would have very, very focused views on black empowerment and women's movement in the 70s and whatever. Well, we don't quite have that in the 80s. And people will make their decisions based on their individual choices. And my position on those sorts of things now is, if you make a decision to do certain things that may have a negative impact, perhaps you ought to look at where you put that and make sure that part of your money goes into something that is going to be beneficial to help you in alleviating some of the other problems of your community. So that, I think, is the best position we can take these days.
Does having a viewpoint like that ever cost you money?
It has cost me money all my life. We started out as the #1 agency in the 70s. We started in May of 1974. We were number 1 or 2 or 3, and by mid 80s, other agencies had far surpassed us, and they had surpassed us because of the caliber of clients they were taking and the kind of advertising they were producing for those clients. That's the price you pay, and that's what that's the decision you make, and that's why it's important that, at least for me, that I own it, because I can afford to lose my own, to lose it or grow or not to grow as I will. I had been fired from a couple of agencies, which is why I started my agency in the first place, because they were asking me to do things I didn't want to do. And you can't do that when someone else is paying you. So you have to be in a position where you can fire yourself.
We need to do a little catching up with your career, because we did, in fact, leave you as a brand new copywriter at an agency. How did you get to the point where you were able to strike out on your own?
Well, I, like the record company, I got, and like women, and true to my bonding nature, I had gotten very close to the creative director, and when he had a split with the owners of the company, he left and went off to England, and of course I had no job, and I went and got another job. And they asked me to do a commercial that I thought was terribly offensive to anyone. It was during the days of the Black Revolution, and they wanted me to do a foaming demonstration in the streets with women running down the streets waving hairspray cans, which I said I would never do that. I got fired. So it became quite apparent to me that if I did not begin to control my own destiny, I was going to have it changed about every 5 years by anybody I bonded with. So I had better just get on out there and do it myself.
To create a business, you need funding. Did you go back to these?
Well, I didn't know
folks?
that then. I really didn't know that. I thought you could just do it.
Hang up the, hang up the jingle and you're
here I
there.
am, world. You know, I'm great. And it's kind of, I talk to women and minorities a lot, and I said, first of all, I could never do that again. And I can't tell anybody else to do it, because you can only do it when you don't know you can't do it. Had I had any idea what I was doing, I never would have done it, because there was no reason for me to succeed. I had no business experience, I had no capital, I had no business, I had absolutely nothing but a strong gut feeling that I had something to say in this business and nobody was going to tell me how to do it. That I was going to find the clients that I needed, I was going to find the funding I needed, because I was right. Now that is so stupid, but it worked. It worked. And we went, I sent a telegram to a friend of mine. I literally had $400. And I went and spent it for the first month's rent for a place. And then I sent a friend who was a bass player with Count Basie Band a telegram that simply said, whom I had not seen in 3 years, send what you can when you can. And the next day he wired me $1,000. And that was my company. I didn't have another bit of business for 6 months. And I finally got my first account. Just kept coming to work. I kept selling everything I owned, my car, clothes, jewelry, anything I could sell to keep the door open while I made the business calls.
Tell us about Proctor & Gardner today. You said it's not #1 any longer, but how many people do you employ?
We were, before such things as full-time, part-time, and flex courses and things, we were always that. We have 23 full-time people and 8 people who are on flex time or part-time. We bill about $15 million, which is very low compared to many of the other agencies, and that's where we are.
What kind of accounts do you represent?
We still represent basically family-based accounts. Our client base is Jewel, food stores, Sears, old-style beer, and Kraft.
Mostly all located in this area, Midwest?
Well, they are all here because if you will, you know, when I had my big twilight zone, I had this 1-year-old baby that I had to take care of, and I had made a decision that no matter what else happened, every day, either I would say good morning or good night to him when he woke up or when he went to bed. That necessitated some very interesting travel patterns, but I made it. Every day of his life, I either said good morning or good night, and I was home. So that meant I had to try to deal with a client base that was close by, that I would not have to leave the city.
Mm-hmm. New York certainly has its Madison Avenue. Is there an equivalent in Chicago?
Michigan Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan Avenue.
And is this city considered one of the country's advertising meccas?
Well, we certainly should. We have, we have some of the largest agencies are here, and of course some of the agencies where the real innovators of the industry are here, like Burnett and Footcon and all those people. Those are the leaders of the industry. They're all here. We consider ourselves a mecca. We think we're kind of neat.
What is your focus more towards print, or is it towards video, or does any advertising agency these days have to do both?
Well, most of us do it all. I would say over 60% of our work is in print. However, more and more we are going toward event marketing these days, which is simply trying to develop events around which to publicize the client and develop a relationship between the client and the community. So we do a lot of that now.
You mentioned the number of people that work for you. What do you look for in people that you hire? Curiosity
and flexibility. Those are the primary 2 things that we look for. I feel that people who are curious will always learn. They will always develop. And they will always want to try new things and take risk. And once they do that, they will also be flexible enough that just because they found the right solution today, that they will not keep looking for it and be willing to change if they find a better one tomorrow.
It sounds like people took chances on you oftentimes in your career.
Oh, yes.
Do you take chances on other people?
Of course. I think that you have to take risk on people, and you have to convince people somehow or the other to take a risk on you. Most things that are safe are already in the process of becoming obsolete. You know, that's all there is to it. And any new idea, any innovative idea has never been tried before, and that's risky. But then that's where you occasionally come up with that real bright one.
If in 1989 a Barbara Proctor walked in your door, broke, no advertising experience, raising a child, out of work, would you give that person a chance?
Well, we do that. You know, we do that often. And, you know, sometimes they will have a child out of work. Sometimes they will have, they will be a little past the golden girl age of 26, blonde. They may have a handicapped child, or they may have parents who have been dying for 5 years. You know, like my grandmother used to die all year long. I mean, she would call us and say, we have to come home for Easter because this is her last one, you know, and she won't be here. So we have all kinds of people. We do try to make it a place where you do not have to fit a traditional employable mold in order to be there.
If we move on a bit to the larger part of your life, it sounds like you've balanced. Your child was important, your job was important, that sort of thing. Give-backs are important to the people, your companies that you work with. You're encouraging to give back. How do you give back?
Well, we have several ways that we try. It used to be very formalized in that we would pick, say, an organization a year, and we would just do whatever that organization needed. Today we are at a level where people generally will tend to ask us to do things like buying tables, developing programs for them, publicizing events. We will do those things. Sometimes we'll do them in behalf of the client, sometimes we will do them ourselves. We also encourage our staff persons to become active in community organizations and professional organizations, because I think it's time for the second tier of management to begin making its way onto the scene and replacing the first tier who are getting tired and want to move on.
That's how Proctor and Gardner gives back. How about Barbara Proctor? How do you give back personally?
Well, surprisingly enough, there is no Barbara Proctor other than Proctor and Gardner, and that's true. I'm a member of my condominium association. I belong to a prison group that we will spend Easter, for example, at the prison. I do various things, but I do those because people do those because they know who Proctor and Gardner is. There are people who do not have a separate identity, and I think I am one such.
When you look at your resume, though, there's a long list of memberships: Chicago Urban League, the Chicago Economic Development Corporation, Board of Directors, Operation Push, Chicago Media Women. I could go on. There's 3 or 4 others. You devote some time to those.
Well, we don't devote as much time as we used to. What we tend to do is to say to them, is there something that I can do from my office for you? There are some memberships that I have to, that I do have to participate in, such as Northwest Memorial Hospital and Illinois Bell and things of that sort, that require my personal input. But for organizations that are the broad-based organizations that have a lot of meetings, I'm not very good at meetings. So I would rather say, whatever is your need of me, just call the office and tell me. We will do it from the office, but I won't be at the meeting, probably.
A number of those are the Women's Advertising Club, the Female Executive Associations, and Chicago Media Women. Do you choose to be involved with them because you think women need an extra?
Well, for 2 reasons. I choose to be involved with them. One, because I think for the organization, I think it is necessary that the organization displays a unity of women at a professional level, and they just need to have my name on the letterhead. And beyond that, there are women coming along that I think will need individual support, that I will maybe take to lunch, to dinner, try to get membership into other organizations, and do the mentoring role. So I think that those are the two things that are important to be done.
Where I'm going with this questioning is, I guess, hearing what you went through or how you set up your business 20 years ago or so, do women need an extra push in the city these days, and do blacks need an extra push in the city these days to break into business?
Women need an extra push. Blacks need an extra push. I have a friend who had not seen in 15 years or so, and I got an advance copy of her book that's coming out. Her name is Barbara Bowles, and the name of the book is Power Failure. And what she has done is document 6 women who absolutely had the world handed to them and managed to blow it. Either just were forced into saying, I don't want to take the job, or somehow disqualified themselves. Women and blacks all really need to take a hard look at whether they want it. You know, we really are at the stage now where people, those of us who have not had and been a part of the power group, we need to really come to terms with, do we really want it? Because we say we do, but we are not always willing to do what it takes.
What does that mean?
Well, it means it's hard, and it's hard work. And women, and you ask a question about women and blacks, and one of the questions that women are still trying to balance. I have a right to be a mother, and I have a right to be president of General Motors. Maybe, but do you have the capacity to do both? And I think that until women, it's going to be a chicken and egg situation. Until they are sure that they can become president of General Motors, they're going to always hold on to that mother role because that one is safe, and they don't want to risk it because their self-esteem is tied up with that, and they're not. And as long as they're protecting that, that's where the priority is. And as long as that's where the priority is, they're never going to be chairman of General Motors.
Are you a good role model?
No.
Why not?
Because I did make that hard decision. And I don't think anybody really wants to face it that much. I mean, you want to feel that you can be, that your role model is Superwoman. And she is all things. She is the perfect wife, mother, lover, boss, all that. That's not real. That's not real. And I tend to be a little more, I'm a Sagittarian, so I'm a little more candid, and and I say, no, you can't do it all, but you can try for it all, and have in priority, those things that you're going to say, yeah, I'm going to have it all, but this is going to be down the line, way down the line, because you can't have it all at the same time.
If you're not a good role model, if people are sitting and listening to your story as you've described it to us, what kind of lessons do you think might be drawn from what you've done?
Well, what I would hope is that you can see that you can be very fulfilled making a choice. All I would like to say is people want their role model to be the thing that they cannot be. I'd like for people to look at me and say, you can be what I am, but you have to make that choice. And don't assume when you look at me that you are looking at the perfect mother or the perfect homemaker or the perfect socialite. I am none of those things. I am just a very good business person. And I'm a person. But that's about it. My social skills are probably very weak. I don't get to exercise them quite as much as I should. I think my son is gorgeous, but that is because he's a wonderful person. I think you have to choose. And I would say, make your choices and be happy with them. Because some people will be happier being the other thing, and don't apologize for it, whatever you choose to be.
At any point during your career, did you think about moving somewhere else?
Never. I would not leave Chicago to go to heaven. I mean, it's wonderful. I would not want to go anywhere else but Chicago.
Why not?
Because it is the most invigorating. It is the most challenging. It is the most frustrating. It is the most rewarding city in the world. There is nothing that you cannot there is not a moment of the day when Chicago is not 100% alive.
Now, if I ask that question of other people, are they going to be as enthusiastic about Chicago?
Oh, of course. Of course. Chicago is a wonderful place. Even when it is beating you down, and you can, it can beat you down. You can be beaten in Chicago, but you'll say, boy, that's a hell of a beating. You know, it's just a great city.
What does it take to have power and influence in this city?
Well, it's integrity, and by integrity, I don't simply mean the apple polish definition of integrity. I mean true fidelity, truth to what it is you are. Chicago will love you, whoever you are, if you are that. Someone said to me about a very close friend of mine once that, you know, why is he your friend? You know, don't you know he's a snake? And I said, of course he is, but he's my snake.
A genuine article, I guess.
He is. That's Chicago. Everybody, they don't put you into category. They know who you are, but they deal with you one-on-one for what you are to them. It's the only city in the world that'll do that.
So would be a way that you could understand why Chicagoans will stay true to politicians, for example, that other cities might look and say, this person's corrupt.
Sure.
He was the genuine article?
He's Chicago, and he did that because that's how they do that in Chicago.
Who are the people in 1989, or the institutions, that have power and influence in this city?
Well, we're a little adrift right now in individuals, I would think. There are some that could be like in the old days when we had a city boss, for example, or in the old days when there was 5 or 6 businessmen in the city who could get the bonds through, who could build the buildings and do that. We don't have that anymore. We are now coming to Chicago now, first of all, no longer has a majority of people. Chicago is a city made up of minorities. There's no single group in this city that is over 50%. So you have different coalitions that are even among themselves trying to find their leadership. You know, there's 40% blacks who are trying to find out who their leader's going to be. There are Croatians who are trying to find out who their leader's going to be. They're Irish. They're everybody is trying to find out. So it's in a city that is becoming right now. And I don't know that I would say that there's any single overriding power in Chicago at the moment.
How about institutions?
I don't know.
Newspapers, for example, are there companies?
I think the newspapers. I think the newspapers are respected, but I don't know that people rely on them for guidance. I think they make up their own minds pretty much, and we're a pretty individualist group of people right in through here. I don't see an awful lot of anything shining through. But I think, you know, come back in 10 years, we'll be there.
Could you help people that don't live here make some sense of the mayor's race? What's going on right now?
It's Chicago politics. it's very simple to us. It's Chicago politics. It's a lot of people who have a lot of access to grind against a lot of other people who had access to grind. And they're all grinding those axes, and the people are watching the show because the city at the moment, the city is in very good hands in that with their various decentralized government. You see, this could never have happened this way when you had a political boss. But now that we no longer have the strong mayor and the weak council, and you have the expanded council, and you have 50 turfs, and everybody has his own circle of power, the people are operating within those circles of power. And so what's going on at the mayor's race is secondary. And there are some people who have a tremendous interest, like the business community and the various institutions have an interest in the long term. And so it'll sort itself out.
As a member of the business community, are you watching this race very carefully?
Oh, of course. Yes.
Is there clearly a business candidate, or can a mayor affect the business and economic condition of this community?
Well, I think at the moment, Mayor Daley, Mayor Daley's son, Richard, is probably the business community's candidate. I mean, that's clear from the fact that from the time he announced a month later, he had generated over $2 million in contributions, and much of it from the business community. So certainly he is the business choice. Just as on the other hand, the third-party candidate, Tim Evans, has a tremendous amount of support among blacks. So we have the enclaves of special interests who are, at the moment, making some media noise. I just think that people are probably going to go out and speak very softly. And it's all kind of futile when you realize that whoever is elected is going to have to run again in 2 years. So we have had a city that has been in political turmoil now for the past 4 years. It's got to go through 2 more. And it's going to be some time before the city settles down, because whoever is elected in April is going to have to hit the ground running again for 91 as soon as they get in the door.
You use the expression, people are watching the show. Yeah. It seems like this is a city where people are very interested in politics.
They are.
Why?
Well, it's just another, it's like the Cubs, and it's just another sport. It's another sport. And it's a good thing to get involved in.
Mm-hmm. Are you personally involved?
No.
Why not?
Because I am a business person, and this is, first of all, a Democratic race. I'm not a Democrat. And beyond that, the client base that I represent serves all the people. We hope that Democrats and Republicans shop the jewel store. We hope they all shop Sears. We hope they all drink Old Style. So I am much too visible to get involved with politics because I don't think it's fair to my clients.
Mm-hmm. As we wrap up, and this is a quick hour, but you've talked a lot about the city being in a state of flux right now. If we drop in to visit you 5 years from now, how do you hope the city might have changed?
Well, in 5 years, we will have a long-term mayor for the first time, and by that time, I think that the city will have, it will stabilize. We will have stabilized our international community, because that is growing very strongly. We will have changed, in essence, our economic base for the city of Chicago, and we'll be going more toward a service industry as opposed to a manufacturing industry. And I think that our school system will have been, hopefully, will have been reformed, and we will have schools that are responsive to local communities and parent councils, and we will be producing from our schools an employable product which the business community will embrace, and Chicago will be paradise.
Barbara Proctor, President and CEO of Proctor & Gardner Advertising, thank you for spending an hour with us.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you.
And that concludes this American Profile interview with Barbara Proctor. For more information, you can write to Proctor & Gardner Advertising. The address is 111 East Wacker Drive, Chicago, Illinois. The zip code is 60601.